Welcome back. Another 3 hours of sightings on the radio coming your way, beginning right now. And two great guests tonight. A little bit later on tonight, we'll be joined by Kenny Young, who just a few days ago broke news on the internet of a remarkable UFO sighting and encounter in Trumbull County, Ohio in 1994. We're going to hear actual 9/11 emergency tapes from Kenny later on tonight. It's going to be very exciting. First up tonight, however, Jim Keith. We're going to talk about his new book called Black Helicopters 2, The Endgame Strategy on Sightings. All right, let's get rolling. A couple of weeks ago, less than that actually, we had Jim Keith on the program talking about another of his new books. What we're going to do tonight, though, is concentrate on black helicopters, an issue that has been really talked about for a number of years now, very much misunderstood by people. We hope to bring some light tonight on the subject that will clear up a lot of the doubt and suspicion that many of you have about this issue. Whether or not it's real is certainly one of the big ones. Are these things real, or are they just military helicopters painted a bit darker than we're used to seeing? Jim Keith's best-selling Black Helicopters Over America was the first book to expose the incredible government cover-up. Now in his new book, Black Helicopters 2, I'm reading from the back cover, The Endgame Strategy. Jim Keith's investigation takes a quantum leap forward, chilling the reader with new revelations, such as, what are the secret forces behind the operation of black helicopters? Why are they terrorizing America? What is the quadrant sign code of the New World Order? Is the government engaged in biological warfare experiments in the United States? Are the black helicopters connected to UFOs, to cattle mutilations? Why does the media cover up the existence of black helicopters? And what is the endgame strategy? We're going to talk to Jim Keith now and find out about that and more. Hello, Jim. Are you there?
Yes, I am, Jeff.
How are you?
I'm very good. How are you doing?
Good. Well, after looking through your book, I'm concerned, as I always am, but this is a new dimension to the whole issue. When did these black helicopters start really catching people's attention, Jim?
Actually, it's thought of as a recent phenomenon, but they go back as late as the late 1960s. And since then, there's been, honestly, thousands of incidents of these unmarked black choppers. People say that they are military craft, just painted this dark kind of khaki color, this dark green. But in fact, that coloration scheme only came in the 1990s with the military, so we know that something else is going on.
They also say, those who see these choppers, that they're unmarked. Are they unmarked, actually, or are the numbers there just painted dark? What have you been able to find out?
Actually, they are unmarked. I spoke to one gentleman who had a job at a local air base, and he was with another person and went inside a hangar and actually viewed one of these up close, and there was nary a trace of any insignia whatsoever. It was not green. It was flat black, and just incidentally, it had flak jackets and grenades inside the cockpit.
Really?
Yeah.
As in for dropping out windows?
Well, I presume so.
That's pretty interesting. The issue of these things flying below legal or allowable ceilings is always very common. How low do these come down?
Well, they land, for that matter. I'm thinking of another incident that took place relatively near to my home. Friends who own a ranch about 50 miles from here, a black chopper flew over at night with a searchlight playing over the ground, and then they noticed that the chopper was spraying something because they could see the droplets in the searchlight. The following morning, there was a swath about 150 feet long of dead vegetation, and within a few days, 13 of their livestock had dropped dead.
Oh, this is nice.
Yeah, and also when they checked with the FAA and the local military authorities, naturally nobody knew anything about it.
Now, of course they land. I knew they landed, but ordinarily in harassment stories that we get and reports I get, they can come down literally within 10 feet of a rooftop at times. I mean, I've heard this often.
Absolutely, absolutely. There are accounts of these choppers hovering down over people's rooftops to the extent of tearing shingles off. I know there, for instance, is one radio announcer in the Southwest who
that narrowed it right down.
What's that?
That narrowed it right down.
Well, I don't necessarily want to mention the name.
I understand.
But he had done a lot of kind of conspiratorial broadcasts, a lot of political type broadcasts, and while he was on the air, one of these things hovered over his roof, tearing up the shingles, and needless to say, after that his programs took somewhat of a more ethereal slant and less political.
Interesting. Well, we'll try and fill in the blank and figure out who that is on our own. This idea of harassment goes beyond just hovering and making noise and popping a few roof shingles. We've had reports actually of homes being sprayed with gunfire, haven't we?
Right. There are actually a number of those. For various reasons, you find these choppers shooting at people. Actually, in one instance, I know launching a missile at a house. This was
That was in Texas.
Was it in Texas? Just off the top of my head, I've got it in one of my books, but I don't recall what date it was.
Set fire to the roof?
Yeah. And what it was this guy was a political activist, and you often see that with these situations of harassment and surveillance linked to political activism.
Yeah, well, this, as I recall, I may be wrong, but I believe it was a couple, and they were involved in an early effort to launch a public impeachment drive, a petition drive, for Bill Clinton to be removed.
In fact, you hit it on the nose.
Okay. Yeah, so there's another example. Now, these reports come in from all over. How frequent are they? One a month? Do we get them often? You've had your ear to the ground on this for quite some time. Is activity more or less constant, or is it somewhat cyclical?
It goes through flaps, actually. There are times when you will get hundreds of accounts in certain vicinities, oftentimes linked to cattle mutilations. You see flaps linked to that, but it does seem to be cyclical. Yeah.
Who's doing this?
Well, as we suspected all along, I believe that it is the government. A lot of these operations have been traced directly to the government, to FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. You see these things in the vicinity of where we suspect underground bases are. And, for my own bet, I would say that you can characterize most of these incidents as simply unmarked choppers doing black operations within the country. Now, those sorts of things have gone on, forever, but specifically, at least since the 1960s, these illegal experiments, these illegal harassments, and so forth. And so, very simply put, it's government black operations in most cases.
And as we know, it's easier to use a helicopter to surveil someone than to drive all over the country doing it. So clearly it's a convenience to keep
It's also much more daunting. You see one of these huge insectoid black choppers in your face, and
sure.
It definitely puts the fear of God into you about issuing any more of your sort of right-wing patriot newspapers, that sort of thing. One interesting account that I have heard about and was validated by a number of sources was that black choppers flew over a freeway a few years back in Salt Lake City, and the cars on the freeway stopped, except for the older, non-computerized models, which kept on going.
Right.
Now, that sounds pretty high tech, but in fact, they talk about that in technical magazines. That technology is right on the horizon, and we should expect that they will have that soon. The police and so forth. But in fact, that shows that we already do have that technology.
It's very easy to put embedded chips in automobile electronics and to have the cars just stopped. It's not hard.
Yeah.
The technology on board these helicopters, I am assuming, runs the gamut. They can literally hover over a house, for those of you who may not know, and see who's in the house, what room they're in, listen to all spoken conversation, monitor all telephone, fax, internet transmissions. This can be done from helicopters or ground units or centralized data gathering locations. It's the surveillance potential is complete.
Right, and one would say that that's it's kind of ominous. You know, obviously it's a tightening of the kind of police military infrastructure in this country, whereby citizens can be surveilled at any distance, be tracked at any time, and it's not even just a matter of catching the crooks and people engaged in illegal operations, but as we've seen many, many times, our government is happy to squash the activities of people who are simply trying to expose the truth.
I was going to ask you who are some of the target individuals most commonly reporting these things, and as has been the case for the last 5 or 10 years, people involved in what we'd call patriotic organizations are usually involved in many of the reports. People who are just asking questions sometimes get paid a visit too. I've talked to people who have, for no apparent reason, been doing a little research, and all of a sudden they'll look out the window or the front door and there'll be something hovering across the street. I mean, it's strange. And to say the least, it is, as you say, Jim Keith, intimidating. The book, Black Helicopters 2, The End Game Strategy, available through Illuminate Press, and we'll tell you about how to get the book. Very interesting, and where do we get into the other issues in the book? He's got a lot of bases covered here. Jim Keith, outstanding investigative journalist, my guest for the first half of tonight's program. And welcome back. My guest for this first half of the program tonight is Jim Keith. His book, Black Helicopters 2, The End Game Strategy. The phone number, 1-800-680-INET. That's 800-680-INET for Illuminate Press, INET. The idea of the helicopters being intimidating is obvious. The noise alone is enough to frighten most people. They're darn loud. But then we have the specter now, Jim, of noise cancellation technology, which I'm told is electronic and can actually be custom-made and tailor-made to cancel the noise out from everything from jet engines to helicopters. Now, how would it be to look across the street or above your house and see a monstrous black helicopter 50 feet, 30 feet, making no noise?
Yeah, I don't think it would be any less intimidating. And another factor is that you're seeing some of these black helicopters that are being fielded seem to be on the cutting edge of the technology, with rather small rotors, with no tail rotors, very insectoid in appearance, very almost demonic in appearance. I don't mean that to be anything more than a metaphor.
I understand.
But we are hearing reports of some truly strange black choppers that are being fielded that have no counterpart in the military technology that we know about.
Don't show up in Jane's aircraft.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Very strange. And we've seen these reports come in from all 50 states, I assume.
Well, the black choppers, yes. As far as these high-tech things, that's more sporadic.
Right. We not only have black helicopters here in the States, we've got them reported in Great Britain and England, I know. Where else?
Right. In Australia, that's a hot spot for this.
Well, we do have some rather large installations down there, don't we?
Indeed we do. You're thinking of Pine Gap, no doubt.
Yeah, we have about 8 secret bases in Australia at last count.
Is that right?
That I heard, yeah.
That many. Yeah, and curiously, or perhaps not so curiously, we often see these choppers supplying these kinds of bases. Why it would not be done in a somewhat mundane fashion to attract less attention, I don't know, but we see the black choppers doing that.
Well, and I remember in Northern California there was an example of helicopters going in and out of a very remote area with no roads and apparently doing just that.
Right, and of course, people say that these things don't exist, but I mean, you get hundreds of witnesses in a case like, for instance, the one in Napa that you're talking about.
The other issue is one of crew. There have to be air crews all over the country. There must be a lot of people flying missions, and one wonders if, in many cases, the pilots may not even know what's going on. They're just sent up to do a job. Any read on that? Do you get contacted by any people who have allegedly flown these items?
In fact, one, yeah, and he was very defensive about the whole thing. My guess is that they probably sign a secrecy writ to keep their mouths shut. Mm-hmm. But in fact, there was one contact with an apparently real black chopper pilot, and he was very, very defensive. And nobody doing this would possibly engage in this sort of thing. And why would you care if we have insignia and so forth? And just apparently was completely blind to the kind of harassment and excesses that are taking place.
Yeah, indeed. The idea of using black helicopters and jet aircraft to spray the ground, to spray people with chemical and biological materials is not just an idea or a concept. It has happened. We have a number of cases that you've documented in the book here. The history, of course, of government, and we have to use that word again, government. It doesn't mean necessarily the people in Washington sitting in the House or the Senate. It's deep layers of our taxpayer-supported government involved in these projects. The history of programs testing chemical and biological agents on the unwilling, unwitting, and innocent American public is unbelievably long and disgusting, and it shows no signs of going away.
Right, and again, of course, this sort of thing just doesn't happen. The government would never be engaged in this sort of thing, but they have repeatedly admitted that they have engaged in secret testing on people with things like psychomimetic agents, LSD and so forth, without people's knowledge. There have been at least 1,000 admitted open-air tests of biowarfare agents in the United States.
Now that's right here in the States, folks. Right here.
Right. Another example I'm sure you're familiar with was a few years back at Dugway Proving Ground on the outskirts of that base in Utah. 4,000, I believe it was, cattle suddenly dropped dead. It was perfectly obvious to everybody that a nerve agent was involved. When they did autopsies, a nerve agent was shown to be the cause of the death, but the government to this day has not admitted that they were responsible for that.
On August 7th, 1994, that famous incident began in Oakville, Washington. Only 600-700 people there. They got, they were doused from above with some weird stuff. Tell us about that. One assumes these things have tapered off, and these sorts of MK Ultra mind control experiments and government gone awry and things like that have disappeared into the background. One never expects that it continues to the present day, but Oakville is a good example of that. It's a little town in Washington with a population of around 660, something like that. And in August of '94, over the course of 3 weeks, 6 times Oakville was blanketed with these tiny gelatinous blobs that caused virtually everybody in the town to become deathly ill, and the sickness lasted for most people about 7 weeks, I was told. Some animals died, and during the period of the fall of this gelatinous kind of brownish, gooey jello material, there were repeated overflies over the town by black choppers and by black unmarked transport planes, and curiously enough, by these large triangular-shaped craft that we've been hearing about lately. It's a fascinating case. I go into it over a whole chapter in the book, but when the gel was analyzed, it was found to contain, now get this, human blood cells lacking nuclei, as well as 2 types of bacteria associated with hospital environments and decayed food. And there was a lot of military activity going on in the Oakville area at this time. I don't think it was one of these anomalous Fortean falls. No, don't think so either. Be right back with Jim Keith. Okay, we're back talking with author and investigative journalist Jim Keith, whose new book, Black Helicopters 2, The End Game Strategy, is available from Illuminate Press at 1-800-680-INET. This issue in Washington is real bizarre, Oakville. As you pointed out, the debris falling down had human white blood cells with no nuclei. Not something you find at the neighborhood drugstore.
At least that's not part of the American tradition to find it there.
Not usually. Pseudomonas, which is rather well known, Enterobacter, another bacteria. These are kind of bacteria that you find in rotten food, as you said, sewage, bad scene, biohazards in your doctor and hospital offices where they throw yuck. Anyway, this is falling on this beautiful little town, Oakville, in Washington. And if it were a Fortean type of bizarre event like falling fish, falling pebbles. All the, quote, government agency investigating this would have to do is say, hey, there's something strange going on, we're checking it out. But that didn't happen. We had overflights, as you said. It doesn't sound normal to apply bacteriological weapons with blood cells being dropped, but who knows?
Yeah, it's truly a curiosity in that sense. The other bacteria that you did mention, however, kind of fit into the modus operandi of government testing that we've seen for quite a few years, using what they called simulants, which would be relatively benign is probably not the term I'm looking for, but let's say that this stuff won't kill you outright. And they use these simulants to test how these things will be distributed, to test how many of the people will get sick and so forth. And they've done that repeatedly. So in a way, the Oakville does sound awfully familiar to me.
It's a medium then.
Yeah.
You know, here we are again. The issue of testing these weapons, which is what they are, on the American public is a long and ugly chapter in our history. The idea of cattle mutilations and black helicopters, you talked about that briefly early on. Ted Oliphant has suggested in a paper and on this very program that some of these helicopters are involved in abducting, as it were, cattle, killing and dissecting and removing parts of them in order to perhaps monitor some degradation of our environment. You've heard that scenario, I imagine? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my guess would be that there's probably a number of reasons why this is done. People say, why wouldn't they just raise cattle, on the back 40 at Dugway Proving Ground,
or go to the nearest slaughterhouse and just help themselves from whatever sample they wanted to test, coming in from all over the place.
Sure. But my theory on that is what they're looking for is cattle in a wide variety of environments to do this with. But one of the things that interests me about the cattle mutilation thing is that our minds are kind of twisted as regards to the black choppers here. All we hear about is UFOs in connection with the cattle mutilations, but actually black choppers are far more often seen in the vicinity of these events.
Something that isn't widely known, but yes, and in some cases when we have a UFO report in the area of a cattle mutilation, the black helicopter shows up very shortly thereafter, almost as if it's tracking or watching.
I sometimes think that I often think that the UFO issue is used to obfuscate these sorts of things.
That's been proposed, yes, and it's a very logical scenario.
Sure. People, they associate UFOs with the cattle mutilations. Therefore, they see some dancing lights, and they go to the newspapers and say that the aliens have arrived, and that obviously tends to discredit their testimony on these sorts of things and make people think that these mutilations didn't happen in the first place.
Certainly possible for portable, if you will, holographic instrumentation and technology to be carried aloft to create the image of a full-blown 30 or 40-foot UFO, a disc, a glowing disc with lights, the whole thing. I mean, that could easily be projected from the technology we allegedly have now online and available. Yeah.
And many of the details that simply galvanize me, that electrify me about these cattle mutilations, curiously enough, never seem to make it into the media.
Almost a total blackout on it now. And the other thing that Ted Oliphant mentioned, Jim, that I'm sure you've heard about, which is fascinating. He was a police officer, of course, in Fife, Alabama, and when they were doing their investigations down there, they found in many cases, in the cattle, in what was left of the cattle's blood supply, as it were. Most of the cases, of course, most of the blood was gone, but they found human pharmaceuticals in the blood, such as anticoagulants and so forth.
Yeah, and there's a number of other things. One thing that's often found is nicotine, which is the most common drug used in tranquilizer gun darts. Mm-hmm. Many of the animals, particularly back in the 60s, were noted to have been infected with Clostridium bacteria, which is an agent that the CIA has specifically admitted to stockpiling. And there are other things as well that are simply not rumors. There are reports within the intelligence community of illegal experimentation done on cattle in the development of, get this, ethnic-specific biowarfare weapons, mm-hmm. because of the similarity of the eye the membrane of the eye of cows to a specific ethnic target.
The other issue is one of being able to fly over a herd at night from a helicopter using infrared and other technology to determine which cattle are sick. They have a different body temperature, and so it'd be very simple to pull a particular animal up and then do what needed to be done, drop the animal back in the pasture, and let the aliens take the rap.
Absolutely. Absolutely, they have very, very broad shoulders for that sort of thing historically.
You have in your book also a short note here at the end of the mutilation chapter, which is very interesting. Involves our friend and your friend and colleague Don Ecker, having to do with the issue of other than cattle mutilations.
Yeah, I was looking into some material that Don Ecker had investigated, and what he noted going through the police database, I believe it was in Colorado, that there were no unsolved murders or mutilations of people, and that includes for instance, the famous Green River killings. And apparently there has been quite a cover-up in terms of human mutilations. I don't have any facts and figures on it, but apparently, according to the database, no such thing exists.
Yeah, now I've had one or two people on the program who have allegedly seen firsthand reports moving on, I don't know if it was NCIC or not, that's the National Computer Information Center, but somewhere on a police wire service, notice of mutilated humans or a human being found that is run one time, it disappears. These reports have been seen by law enforcement officials.
Sure.
But they disappear very quickly.
And then we get into a truly twisted infrastructure there, which is the whole ritual mutilation thing, which, as mad as it may seem, often interfaces with military intelligence.
Yeah. I hear music. That means time for our next break. My guest is Jim Keith. If you'd like to call in, if you've seen a black helicopter or something you perceive to be such, this is the man to talk to about it. 1-888-ON-RADIO is our phone number, as always, of course. And do drop by the website, sightings.com. A whole bunch of new material just went up a couple of hours ago. Fascinating reading for you there right now on the Internet. Welcome back. Sightings, the program. I'm Jeff Rentz here with you 6 nights a week, 3 hours a night. Great program tonight. Jim Keith is here talking about his new book, Black Helicopters 2, The End Game Strategy. Ordering number for this is 1-800-680-INET, 680-INET. Looking through the book, very interesting. Lots of pictures for those of you who may have seen something. Jim's book is full of visual references. There are a number of great chapters in here. We'll talk about some more of them as we go on. If you want to call in, we are getting calls right now. Again, it's 888-ON-RADIO. The idea of foreign troops training in the United States is covered rather extensively in the book, and this is an important part of this issue. Do you find that somehow black helicopter activity may be linked to UN troops training here, Jim?
Yeah, we actually see that quite a bit, where the pilots and so forth of these choppers are observed closely, and they're speaking foreign languages, or they're Oriental. Actually, oddly enough, that has been going on since the 60s. Apparently, foreign black choppers in America, I think it's a little easier to actually accomplish that these days because we have kind of an open skies policy. Anybody can fly through here. But yeah, there are definite connections between this kind of UN activity and this bridge, the bridge across the water to Russia, and that sort of thing, and sort of the eroding away of national sovereignty and the idea of putting a one-world government in place.
Why are these, some people say, well, big deal, foreign troops have trained here forever. Why does it seem to be increasing, the numbers of them?
Well, the best thing
you've
to do
got pictures, Jim, in the book here, excuse me.
Yeah.
You have pictures here of Russian military equipment on trains.
Sure.
It's amazing what's over here. Why ship them all the way over here in their materiel to train here? What's the deal?
There are so many aspects of that. There are so many insidious aspects. I'll give you one of them. At the highest levels of the military, we have Russian observers these days. We have the Chinese being shipped, as has been in the news recently, high-tech computer components that enable them to target us. Now,
with their missiles.
Yeah, with their missiles.
Big
yeah.
scandal.
And
big
I mean, one
problem.
can view this through rose-colored glasses and come up with terms like perestroika and détente, but in fact, historically, we look at those sorts of things, and détente has always been something that lasted for a little while, and then mankind, in his animal aspect, has always gone back to these antagonisms. And so the idea of opening our borders completely to other countries, the idea of allowing free shipping without any examination of the cargo, it becomes a rather touchy issue in these days of potential biowarfare, with China, for instance, becoming the second largest economy in the world. I mean, for all the glad-handing, I still think that there is some danger in America opening her gates wide, for instance, to the KGB and the Chinese.
Okay, let's go to the phones and say hello to Erik, who's calling in from Vancouver, Washington, listening to us on KOTK. Hi, Erik.
Hi.
Go right ahead.
Well, I was outside last Saturday night, about 11 o'clock. It was pitch dark. And I was looking up in the sky just because I thought, well, maybe I'll see something.
Uh-huh. Don't look, you can't see, right?
Yeah. And there was, first I saw what was obviously a satellite, something moving from the south to the north. And then shortly after that, another one. And as the second satellite passed by, I saw what I thought was a shooting star traveling from the east to the west, real dim shooting star. And I don't know if that had anything to do with what I saw next, but probably about a minute later, I saw what I thought was another satellite traveling from the northwest to the southeast, except it was going much slower and in a zigzag pattern, kind of at an overall arc.
Okay.
And I couldn't imagine what it could possibly be.
Do we have a link with black helicopters here, or is this just a sighting of a UFO?
It's just a sighting of a UFO.
Uh-huh.
It just made me think, if I can look up on any given night, and see something odd.
Some people will say that. They say it's quite easy to see strange, anomalous things. All you got to do is get out there and make the effort.
Yeah, I was wondering if anybody might have ever seen anything like that or had.
Well, we have had a lot of reports on the program, Erik, of people seeing satellites that all of a sudden change course, as it were. Yeah, it's not uncommon. Do we have an answer for you? Unfortunately, no. There's a lot of things up there that apparently we make, and some things flying around up there that maybe they make. But it's a busy sky, to be sure. So thank you for that. And if you had a question directly for Jim?
No.
Have you seen any black helicopters, Erik?
No.
Not that you know.
Not that I know of.
Okay. All right. Keep looking. If you see something that you can't explain and you think it is definitely of a UFO nature, you can certainly call, and this is for everyone across the country. You can report unidentified flying objects to two different locations. The MUFON people, of course, at 1-800-UFO-2166, 1-800-UFO-2166, or the National UFO Reporting Center up there in Washington at 206-722-3000. 206-722-3000. So next time, if you have something really strange, give them a call. Thanks.
So there's a couple of connections that came to mind as Erik was talking.
Mm-hmm.
One happened within the last 6 months here in Nevada, where I live. which is a fireball or a meteor or whatever the heck it was, went down about 20 miles from me, and the area immediately, within an hour or so, was swarming with black helicopters. I only found out about this about 2 weeks after this took place. But another thing that I'm reminded of with these satellites and these strange fireballs is that we're seeing a heavy incidence of these green or orange fireballs that move at a very slow rate across the horizon.
Orbs.
And they're seen all over the world, and I link those in another book I did called Mind Control, World Control, to testing of Tesla electromagnetic weapons.
Mm-hmm.
These are actually very common these days, whereas you don't see any of these noted prior to the last 10 years. But what Erik had said kind of spurred me to think about those two things.
Well, it's true, and in Australia they have, for a number of years now, seen a tremendous number of these plasma balls, if you will, orbs of fire. I know Ross Dow, our colleague down there who runs the UFO reporting line, said, I think he said they stopped counting at over 8,000 of them.
I didn't even realize it was that high a number.
Oh yeah, this goes I guess a year ago or so. They stopped totaling them. They still take the reports, but he was running a count, thousands and thousands of them. Sam in Little Rock is calling in, listening to us on the Signal KSYG. Hello, Sam. Welcome.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
Hi, listen, the reason I called, I've listened to your show a few times, and I'm one of these people who's always taken a little grain of salt.
Good.
The
we
stories I hear on UFOs and first something another, and there's always that bit of mystery in your mind, thinks, well, maybe this is true. But your show tonight, two things have really hit close to home for me. First of all, I do not live in the Little Rock area. I live due north of the Little Rock area, almost to the Missouri border. And there's two incidences that have happened up there in the last year. One, a good friend of mine is very active on the internet with his congressmen and senators. And about 12 months ago or so, he sent a letter by internet sharing his views, which were negative, concerning our country's interaction with China.
Right. Big scandal there, yes.
Yes, and within just a matter of 3 or 4 days, while he was at work and his wife and son were at home, there was a black helicopter hovering over their house. And she could make out the features in the man's face that was flying.
That close.
Yes. And so when he first told me about this, I thought, well, that's just sounds so bizarre. I never had heard of any such thing.
Why would they single this man out? Any guesses?
I don't know. He's not an extremist by any means. He's white collar, a professional, and who is very actively supports local candidates and is concerned about his community.
So he's a political activist, well known in his community.
Political activist, yes, and leans to the right of center. I would say probably a conservative libertarian would be a pretty good description of he and I both.
Was this a daylight sighting?
It was a daylight, yeah.
Right over the house. How close? Like close enough to see the man's face,
her subjective view. She'd say probably 100 to 150 feet above the house. She said it was close enough that she could make out the man's face. It was flying the chopper.
Just hovering there. How long did it hover?
She said probably about 5 minutes, and then it just took off.
Jim?
And so she was extremely terrified by this.
Let me get a comment from Jim Keith and ask you to hold on through our news break. Jim, what about that? That's a pretty interesting profile.
Those sorts of things are not uncommon at all. A person takes a visible stance as an activist, particularly if they're in a position, let's say a white-collar person, to be effective as opposed to just be a wacko, and there's that chopper outside their window.
It's kind of like a calling card. We're watching you. We know what you said. We know what you're up to. Don't forget about us. Okay, our guest, Jim Keith, and hang on, Sam. We're going to take our news break, if you will, and come back and continue with point number 2 from your phone call, Black Helicopters 2, The Endgame Strategy by Jim Keith, 1-800-680-INET for Illuminat Press. And we'll continue with more. Don't forget the website, sightings.com. Lots of things up there. We'll be back in just a couple minutes. Welcome back. Hour number 2, Sightings on the radio tonight. Black Helicopters 2 is the book. The author, Jim Keith, is with us now for another half hour. We're going to go to Ohio and talk to Kenny Young about a remarkable UFO encounter and sighting up there in 1994, just uncovered by Kenny. He's a terrific investigator. Sam is on the line holding now. He's calling in from Arkansas, listening to us on KSYG. Okay, Sam, point number 2 for us.
Okay, let me tell you first, the first incident I explained to you took place about 25 miles from where I live. The town that I live in is a small town of just under 1,000 people.
That's a small town.
Very rural, farming and logging community. Depends a lot on tourism and fishing out of the river where we live.
Okay.
Right across the river from us, just south of us, is one of the proposed biosphere sites.
Oh.
And some of us locally became aware of this just this last year and have been concerned about it, but we can't seem to get anyone else to listen to us or take any concern about it. About a year ago, 9-10 months ago, one morning about 10 o'clock, coming from the northwest of our town was a series of several C-130s flying over, and they were all white with no markings. As they would approach the town, just as they got about what would be about the edge of the city limits, there was a stream of what appeared to be some white smoke or gas trailed out of the tips of the wings on both sides, and it would fly across, and then so far a distance, maybe 150 yards or so apart, maybe 300 feet apart, or a little further will be the next one. And the same thing would happen. Just as it got to about the same point, this white stream of smoke would come out of the tips of the wings. As they cleared the other side of the town, the smoke would stop, and then they would continue on. They were gone. And this would happen about 10 o'clock in the morning and again around 2 in the afternoon every day for about 4 or 5 days. And in a small town, imaginations can run wild anyway, and several people started calling the air base in Little Rock and different places, their congressmen, trying to find out what this was about, what was going on.
Of course.
And we got several different explanations. None of them really made any sense. The one explanation that seemed to crop up the most, we were told from the air base in Little Rock that they were conducting a test to determine how close in formation these C-130s could fly without interfering with each other's airspace in order to drop cargo. And several of us knew quite well that we've been doing that with C-130s for quite a long time, and we've already figured out that problem, and so it must be something else. But that was the best explanation that they could give to us.
Okay.
Well, after this had gone on for about 4 or 5 days, it stopped, and the very next day, about 5 or 6 Humvees pulled into town with 6 to 8 men in uniform, full regalia, and weapons in each one. And some of the local people asked what was going on, and they were told, well, this is the annual raid the local woods for marijuana patches, which is a common occurrence in our area. But we knew from past experience that whenever that happens, they bring a helicopter up from the reserve base down close to Little Rock, and all the local deputy sheriffs and such get to go up in the choppers and help them to spot the patches and explain to them how to get there and whose farm that's located on.
Okay,
and so on.
all right, got it.
And but none of that was happening. All the local authorities were going about their regular routines, and whatever these guys in the Hummers were doing, they came in and were seen, and then they disappeared, and they were not seen again. No real explanation given of any of that either. It was just very curious to all of us that such a thing should happen, and what did it mean, and why it'd be so secretive.
Right.
Why, I think the comment was made earlier by someone, I believe, that if they had just come out and said, well, we were conducting kind of a dry run on upcoming maneuvers, and it's none of your business, most of us would say, oh, okay, thank you.
Well, silence, it's so easy to put out some kind of an official story. Jim, what about the idea of white unmarked C-130s?
Well, that is obviously the coloration, the UN
yep.
coloration, which the biosphere the biospheres around the country are run by the UN, and these are usually pristine wilderness areas or national parks, that sort of thing.
That's where we live. We're in the national forest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, have been are under the care of the UN, and some people see that as a wonderful open hands policy. But at the same time, what that does is it takes these areas out of the control of the U.S., which is, well, it doesn't sit well. It doesn't bode well with a lot of us.
Okay, all right, Sam. We didn't answer the question too thoroughly, but you got some kind of an answer. Possibly United Nations markings in that there were no markings, but painted white.
That's what we had ascertained.
Yeah, I figured you would.
And let me ask you one question though. There are some other issues I would like to address with you at some point, not necessarily on the air. Is there some way that I can contact you where we could talk sometime?
Jim Keith?
Yeah, absolutely. The best way to do that would be to drop a note to my publisher at, you got your pen?
Yes.
1-800-680-INET, I-N-E-T, and then I will respond. I'll give you a ring.
Okay.
Okay, Sam?
And give me your name again.
Jim
Keith.
Keith.
Yeah.
Keith.
Keith.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Sam.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for calling in. I got some email here. I myself worked and was in charge of an airfield while stationed in Germany, and can say that yes, those choppers are totally unmarked. And also something not mentioned tonight is that they carry rocket launchers on them. Can't say much more, but something just to confirm your guest's statements. The paint is a specialized black paint used on these birds and is made for intense cold and heat operation.
That fits with the profile, doesn't it?
Sure does. Let's see, we have another one here. There was a period of time when a talk show radio person in the Southwest stopped even letting people talk about black helicopters. So ask your guests about when that was, time, date-wise. What's the time frame on that?
Just off the top of my head, I believe it was about 5 years. Well, let's see, it would have been about 5 years ago. Double check that in my first book, Black Helicopters Over America. It has the exact date.
Interesting. Okay. Now, the issue of road signs has been talked about for a long time, and boy, this book has a complete treatise on it. The quadrant sign code, and people would say, well, we've heard about these stickers being placed on the back of highway road signs and road signs all over the place. We can't find any. Well, there are many pictures of them here in Jim Keith's book, and apparently someone has been able to crack the code and figure out what's going on here.
Yeah, a very good researcher named Harold Green had studied the reflective stickers that were on the back of the road signs in his state. I believe it was Wisconsin, and really burnt the midnight oil to figure these things out, and gave me a complete write-up on a language that these stickers on the backs of stop signs and other road signs, what it depicts. Apparently, in order to give directions to drivers who do not read English. And I've got a lot of photographs. I've been receiving photographs from all over the country of these quadrant sign code stickers, and when deciphered, they all seem, in fact, to fall in place. And I believe that Green has cracked the code. That portion of the book has been receiving a lot of attention from people, because there's the New World Order right at the end of your street.
Yeah, and this was in Michigan that Mr. Green did his work. When we're talking about quadrant here, imagine a stop sign, which is an 8-sided sign, and just look at the back of it. Put an X right, a plus sign. Draw it into 4 quarters, as it were, upper left, upper right, lower left, lower right. And these stick-on signs are applied in the quadrants of that sign, or just a regular rectangular sign as well. They'll be put in the quadrants, and they have quite clearly in Jim's book here, according to Mr. Green, indications of how the driver is supposed to respond. Turn left, turn right. They're remarkable. It's a real code, no doubt about it, and most intriguing.
And like I say, I've been getting photographs from all over the country with the identical code.
Same thing.
Yeah.
They have to drive against traffic to read these, though, correct?
Presumably so, yeah.
Yeah, the idea is that they wouldn't be following, they'd be on the opposite side of the freeway going the wrong way to read these signs.
Which would suggest that traffic had been stopped.
That's right.
These were the only vehicles on the road.
It certainly would. Yes, if you want to call in, Jim will be here for a few more minutes tonight, 1-888-ON-RADIO. We still have some time left. The other issue that, in addition to the road signs, is where are these drivers going to be vectored to? That's another one to consider.
Yeah, the directions seem to lead to facilities that are large facilities that can be used for people processing, and I don't want to go hysterical here, but I think it's a contingency program. If we do see wide scale uprising in the country, I think it's a contingency for handling that sort of thing. If we see a major revulsion or a major disagreement with having lots of UN troops, then I think these facilities are going to be used for handling people.
People think that, it would be hard to stop all traffic on all roads. No, they have things called presidential directives and executive orders just waiting for signatures, which would literally suspend all rights and put us into a state of what many call a dictatorship. I'll be right back with more as we continue visiting with Jim Keith, author of Black Helicopters 2, The Endgame Strategy, in the first half of our program tonight. Okay, our remaining minutes with author Jim Keith. Someone just called in. Thank you for the call that advised us that C-130s. Jim called in on a cell phone and in Little Rock. Are you there, Jim?
I'm still here, yes.
Oh, all right, good. Someone called in and said that C-130s will vent fuel out the wingtips, which could turn into many little contrails. Who knows? I
don't know if you're aware of that issue, Jeff, with the contrails, but that's something else we're seeing that is truly curious.
Oh, I want to cover that. I am aware of it. Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. I don't really have the information at my fingertips, but I'll give you a brief rundown. In a lot of areas of this country, we're seeing a huge number of contrails done in crisscross patterns, literally hundreds of contrails.
Yeah.
And people are suggesting that this jet fuel that is being used is purposely being dumped upon people. That sounds tremendously paranoid. But the fact is, when you're aware of this kind of long-term depopulation program, there may be some experimentation like that going on.
By the way, there is some additive or several additives to the fuel, which has been isolated by investigators as being, boy, if I could remember, I don't want to misquote this, but it seems to me that it was an unnecessary additive. It was not a healthy thing to be involved with, and it was definitely being dumped by lots of planes up in the air. So. Yeah,
this fuel, from what I understand, is carcinogenic.
That's right.
And I have I have an extremely personal stake in this, in that I was very, very fond of a young woman who lived some miles from here near an Air Force base, who died from metal poisoning just within the past few years, about 3 years ago, apparently from these contrails and the takeoffs of these planes.
She lived in the flight path?
She lived right next to the airport or base or whatever it is.
There is also some talk, and again, I don't want to start rumor and speculation unnecessarily, but there is some reason to believe that there are also additives being put in gasoline, and so every roadway would become a vector to release possibly. It's all there. It's all there. Okay, Gary in Everett, Washington is on the line. Hello, Gary. Welcome to the program, and how is everything up there?
Hi, Jeff. Hello, Jim.
Hi.
Hey, Gary.
I had, I didn't see the helicopters, but I tried to track down a story that it was about 1993. I'll try to run through this real quick because I want to ask Jim his opinion on the official explanation. I was listening to a talk radio show in the morning, and a news report came on about an unidentified explosion just off the out in the water here, apparently just a little about 20 miles south of Seattle. And so at that time I was doing a little UFO investigating and or research rather, and I called the radio station to ask if there were any UFO reports that evening, and the lady wanted to know why, and I said, well, because sometimes UFO reports happen at the same time when loud explosions are heard. Like that. Well, as soon as I mentioned UFOs, she didn't want to hear about it. Now, the next thing that happened was on this radio program, a lady called in, just a caller. This was unrelated to that story. She said that night, dark helicopters with no lights on were flying low around her apartment building, and she could look out the window. They were so close that she could see the pilot's face on one of them, and they were just flying around her building. She wanted to know if that was legal. Well, so then I called back to the radio station because they didn't say anything about that on the news, so I asked them if they knew about it. Yes, they had heard about it. However, they weren't going to report on it because, quote, they didn't think there was a story there. So then I called the TV news, and I got a TV news director here. He said he knew the captain or whatever in charge at McCord Air Force Base, and the official explanation, I'm running through this real fast, was that these black helicopters were on a training mission from Kentucky. They weren't here anymore. They had gone back home. There was no story, and they weren't going to report on it. I wanted to ask Jim what he thought about it.
Well, we know that Fort Campbell, Kentucky is allegedly one of the bases for one of the larger contingents of black helicopters.
Oh, interesting.
Go ahead, Jim.
You know, that is very interesting, what you're talking about, Gary, because I was aware of explosions taking place off the Washington coast. The incident that I knew about was in August of 1994, and it hooks right into the Oakville thing in that explosions were heard at sea, and then globules, again, of this clear gel were found on the beach, along with hundreds of dead crabs, and people, when they touched the globules, became sick. So apparently there has been testing of some rather interesting explosives off the coast of Washington.
But nobody wanted to talk about it because there was no story there.
No story.
Well, thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you.
We're almost out of time. Let me very quickly try and welcome Linda to the program. Go ahead, Linda. You're on the line there, and Jim is listening.
Hi. I live northeast of Snohomish, which is, 35 miles north of Seattle, Washington.
Right, Snohomish, beautiful country.
Yeah, and north of us, around Arlington area, is Jim Creek Radar Station. Up there's a radar base, and they'll let people come in there and go fishing and stuff like that with passes and stuff.
Okay.
But anyway, we see black helicopters have a normal pathway over our place all the time. And last summer, there was sometimes we'd see them 3 times in a month. And
now, these weren't khaki colored or anything of that sort.
No, they were black, flat black, and they always flew real low. And they had, and we would make jokes about it. Oh, here the black helicopters, we're all getting spied on again. You know, it was always a joke for us. And we would run outside to see if we were right. And but it was during broad daylight, and every once in a while one passes, but it seems to be more often in the summertime. And the other thing, one incident the end of last summer, there was a black cargo plane flew real low over the trees. It was so low it rattled the windows of the house.
Right.
And
Linda, we have to break here.
Okay.
So hold on. We'll come back and finish with Linda. Say good night to Jim and welcome our next guest as we continue here with sightings on the radio. All right, welcome back. We're beginning the second half of tonight's 3-hour program. We're holding Jim over for a few minutes so we can finish up with Linda. Linda, go ahead with your call, and please be brief. We are over time now.
As far as the black helicopters go, we've seen so many of them in this area. We just assumed they were from Jim Creek because they always came from the north. And we didn't think much about it. We just figured they were doing something we weren't supposed to know about. And that other thing with that bomb that went off, that loud sound up there
the
towards
explosion.
Tacoma.
Yes.
We heard they were just destroying some kind of missile. They had some kind of bomb or something that they said they were setting off to destroy it.
Well, it's one of those things we probably won't ever know for sure.
Yeah. And one last thing. We've had for about the last 2 years, and I thought maybe somebody had some type of radio tower or something. The dogs all around this whole area, we live in a real rural area, but a lot of people have dogs, they howl, and they all do it at the same time, and you can hear it just echoing all through the valley up here. Dogs howling, and at minimum of once a day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, and I wonder if that was either radio signals coming from the new Navy base out here, or if it was coming from Jim Creek.
Well, all the above are possible. We live in a fishbowl of electromagnetic radiation of all kinds. The spectrum is loaded now, and it could be any one of a number. Thanks, Linda, for your call.
Sure.
And the input, and from up there in Snohomish. Okay, thank you. Jim Keith, we got to go. The book is Black Helicopters 2, The End Game Strategy. And again, the phone number for ordering is 1-800-680-INET. Thank you, Jim. It's been very interesting.
Good visiting with you, Jeff.
We'll talk soon.
All right.
Good night. Okay, let's switch gears now. What we're going to do is head on up to the Midwest and attention, Jim?
Actually, it's thought of as a recent phenomenon, but they go back as late as the late 1960s. And since then, there's been, honestly, thousands of incidents of these unmarked black choppers. People say that they are military craft, just painted this dark kind of khaki color, this dark green. But in fact, that coloration scheme only came in the 1990s with the military, so we know that something else is going on.
They also say, those who see these choppers, that they're unmarked. Are they unmarked, actually, or are the numbers there just painted dark? What have you been able to find out?
Actually, they are unmarked. I spoke to one gentleman who had a job at a local air base, and he was with another person and went inside a hangar and actually viewed one of these up close, and there was nary a trace of any insignia whatsoever. It was not green. It was flat black, and just incidentally, it had flak jackets and grenades inside the cockpit.
Really?
Yeah.
As in for dropping out windows?
Well, I presume so.
That's pretty interesting. The issue of these things flying below legal or allowable ceilings is always very common. How low do these come down?
Well, they land, for that matter. I'm thinking of another incident that took place relatively near to my home. Friends who own a ranch about 50 miles from here, a black chopper flew over at night with a searchlight playing over the ground, and then they noticed that the chopper was spraying something because they could see the droplets in the searchlight. The following morning, there was a swath about 150 feet long of dead vegetation, and within a few days, 13 of their livestock had dropped dead.
Oh, this is nice.
Yeah, and also when they checked with the FAA and the local military authorities, naturally nobody knew anything about it.
Now, of course they land. I knew they landed, but ordinarily in harassment stories that we get and reports I get, they can come down literally within 10 feet of a rooftop at times. I mean, I've heard this often.
Absolutely, absolutely. There are accounts of these choppers hovering down over people's rooftops to the extent of tearing shingles off. I I know there, for instance, is one radio announcer in the Southwest who
that narrowed it right down.
What's that?
That narrowed it right down.
Well, I don't necessarily want to mention the name.
I understand.
But he had done a lot of kind of conspiratorial broadcasts, a lot of political type broadcasts, and while he was on the air, one of these things hovered over his roof, tearing up the shingles, and needless to say, after that his programs took somewhat of a more ethereal slant and less political.
Interesting. Well, we'll try and fill in the blank and figure out who that is on our own. This idea of harassment goes beyond just hovering and making noise and popping a few roof shingles. We've had reports actually of homes being sprayed with gunfire, haven't we?
Right. There are actually a number of those. For various reasons, you find these choppers shooting at people. Actually, in one instance, I know launching a missile at a house. This was
that was in Texas.
Was it in Texas? You know, just off the top of my head, I've got it in one of my books, but I don't recall what date it was.
Set fire to the roof?
Yeah. And what it was this guy was a political activist, and you often see that with these situations of harassment and surveillance linked to political activism.
Yeah, well, this, as I recall, I may be wrong, but I believe it was a couple, and they were involved in an early effort to launch a public impeachment drive, a petition drive, for Bill Clinton to be removed.
In fact, you hit it on the nose.
Okay. Yeah, so there's another example. Now,
you know, that sounds pretty high tech, but in fact, they talk about that in technical magazines that technology is right on the horizon, and we should expect that they will have that soon, the police and so forth. But in fact, that shows that we already do have that technology.
It's very easy to put embedded chips in automobile electronics and to have the cars just stopped. It's not hard.
Yeah.
The technology on board these helicopters, I am assuming, runs the gamut. They can literally hover over a house, for those of you who may not know, and see who's in the house, what room they're in, listen to all spoken conversation, monitor all telephone, fax, internet transmissions. This can be done from helicopters or ground units or centralized data gathering locations. It's the surveillance potential is complete.
Right, and one would say that's it's kind of ominous. You know, obviously it's a tightening of the kind of police military infrastructure in this country, whereby citizens can be surveilled at any distance, be tracked at any time, and it's not even just a matter of catching the crooks and people engaged in illegal operations, but as we've seen many times, our government is happy to squash the activities of people who are simply trying to expose the truth.
I was going to ask you who are some of the target individuals most commonly reporting these things, and as has been the case for the last 5 or 10 years, people involved in what we'd call patriotic organizations are usually involved in many of the reports. People who are just asking questions sometimes get paid a visit too. I've talked to people who have, for no apparent reason, been doing a little research, and all of a sudden they'll look out the window or the front door and there'll be something hovering across the street. I mean, it's strange. And to say the least, it is, as you say, Jim Keith, intimidating. The book, Black Helicopters 2, The End Game Strategy, available through Illuminate Press, and we'll tell you about how to get the book. Very interesting, and where do we get into the other issues in the book? He's got a lot of bases covered here. These reports come in from all over. How frequent are they? One a month? Do we get them often? You've had your ear to the ground on this for quite some time. Is activity more or less constant, or is it somewhat cyclical?
It goes through flaps, actually. There are times when you will get hundreds of accounts in certain vicinities, oftentimes linked to cattle mutilations. You see flaps linked to that, but it does seem to be cyclical, yeah.
Who's doing this?
Well, you know, as we suspected all along, you know, I believe that it is the government. A lot of these operations have been traced directly to the government, to FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. You see these things in the vicinity of where we suspect underground bases are. And, you know, for my own bet, I would say that you can characterize most of these incidents as simply unmarked choppers doing black operations within the country. Now, those sorts of things have gone on, forever, but specifically, at least since the 1960s, these illegal experiments, these illegal harassments, and so forth. And so, very simply put, it's government black operations in most cases.
And as we know, it's easier to use a helicopter to surveil someone than to drive all over the country doing it. So clearly it's a convenience to keep
It's also much more daunting. You see one of these huge insectoid black choppers in
you
space,
bet.
and
Sure.
it definitely puts the fear of God into you about issuing any more of your sort of right-wing patriot newspapers, that sort of thing. One interesting account that I have heard about and was validated by a number of sources was that black choppers flew over a freeway a few years back in Salt Lake City, and the cars on the freeway stopped, except for the older, non-computerized models, which kept on going.
Right.
Now,
welcome back. Another 3 hours of sightings on the radio are coming your way, beginning right now. And two great guests tonight. A little bit later on tonight, we'll be joined by Kenny Young, who just a few days ago broke news on the internet of a remarkable UFO sighting and encounter in Trumbull County, Ohio in 1994. We're going to hear actual 9/11 emergency tapes from Kenny later on tonight. It's going to be very exciting. First up tonight, however, Jim Keith. We're going to talk about his new book called Black Helicopters 2, The Endgame Strategy on Sightings. All right, let's get rolling. A couple of weeks ago, less than that actually, we had Jim Keith on the program talking about another of his new books. What we're going to do tonight, though, is concentrate on black helicopters, an issue that has been really talked about for a number of years now, very much misunderstood by people. We hope to bring some light tonight on the subject that will clear up a lot of the doubt and suspicion that many of you have about this issue. Whether or not it's real is certainly one of the big ones. Are these things real, or are they just military helicopters painted a bit darker than we're used to seeing? Jim Keith's best-selling Black Helicopters Over America was the first book to expose the incredible government cover-up. Now in his new book, Black Helicopters 2, I'm reading from the back cover, The Endgame Strategy. Jim Keith's investigation takes a quantum leap forward, chilling the reader with new revelations, such as, what are the secret forces behind the operation of black helicopters? Why are they terrorizing America? What is the quadrant sign code of the New World Order? Is the government engaged in biological warfare experiments in the United States? Are the black helicopters connected to UFOs, to cattle mutilations? Why does the media cover up the existence of black helicopters? And what is the endgame strategy? We're going to talk to Jim Keith now and find out about that and more. Hello, Jim. Are you there?
yes, I am, Jeff.
How are you?
I'm very good. How are you doing?
Good. Well, after looking through your book, I'm concerned, as I always am, but this is a new dimension to the whole issue. When did these black helicopters start really catching people?